And, and it's very, very clear. There's no pathological issue here. There's no, demonization here that's appropriate. This should have been healed 25 and 30 years ago. There's no pattern of sexual abuse. Child molestation is, a word that Vicky Pollan uses, which is absurd. Child molestation has a very particular definition, has nothing to do with this whatsoever. It's a kind of slanderous use of loaded psychological jargon, which is just so completely, vicious. It's kind of like, if I can use an analogy, it's kind of like, McCarthyism. And this is a term that, the colleague you mentioned also uses, sexual McCarthyism, meaning McCarthy was against communism. Communism did really bad things. Communism actually killed, tens of millions of people. McCarthy takes communism and the fear and loathing people have of communism, the evil of communism, and uses it to attack people for 1,000 reasons which have nothing to do with communism. That's McCarthyism. Sexual McCarthyism, and the term was actually coined by Alan Dershowitz, but it's been used by, I actually thought that I coined it 2 years ago, and then I looked it up online and I was so disappointed, right? To see that Alan Dershowitz wrote a book by that name. But sexual McCarthyism means you take the loathing that we have, the correct loathing, of sexual abuse, but then you use it, right? You actually abuse sexual abuse, right? You use it for a series of other far more complex and dark agendas, which you actually can't own, and you cloak yourself, right, in a respectable kind of battle. And that's precisely what McCarthy did, and that's what Alan Dershowitz calls sexual McCarthyism. So to take a sexual mistake, which is, of anyone's, whether it's yours or mine or the rabbis or the editors, right, and to then transform it, into kind of this larger-than-life archetypal original sin, motivated and driven by a kind of sexual hysteria, right, is deeply problematic from an ethical perspective. Right? And I feel, again, borrowing Dennis Prager's phrase and Warren Farrell's phrase, my personal experiences, I feel like I've been name raped. Right? When I say name raped, I want to be really clear. I don't in any way minimize the experience of rape. God forbid. However, major feminists have pointed out, and I've spent 2 years reading the literature, that actually rape is not merely a physical event. Right? From Susan Brown Miller, there's, every major, Robin Morgan, have really pointed out that rape is a broader event. It's an event which involves kind of the violation of a person's essence. So while kind of, violent rape obviously is a class by itself, Prager has pointed out, I think correctly, that, he said that when he would talk about name rape, people would call him and say, how can you say that? That's offensive to women. And he would say, on his show, well, what would you feel if this happened to your son? And even then people would check. Right? So to have, your sexuality distorted and demonized for 25 years, and then kind of put on the web in a distorted and demonized way. And until I took these polygraphs, I had no way of responding to it. I just didn't occur, like, how can I respond? What can I do? And it wasn't until, I hired a fantastic group of lawyers, here in Salt Lake City. They said, well, polygraph it. And they said, we actually know the best person to polygraph in America, who's cited in all the cases. He specializes in sexual issues. And we went and we were able to identify how to polygraph it. And we did, full, set of questions. And we were able to actually dismiss, for the first time, that actually these stories as told are not true, right? They're distortions of a very dramatic kind. Now, as you say correctly, Luke, you said in the car, everyone has a perspective. But not all perspectives are equal, right? In other words, you can't distort a past story. For example, you can't say, I'm Vicky Pollan, I didn't like my parents. I had a really hard childhood. So therefore, there was a satanic cult that murdered babies. No. That's actually not okay. There's actually not a Jewish satanic cult around America that murders babies. That's not true, right? And that's not just a perspective problem. That's an empirical problem, right? If I can borrow your phrase, And so, I would be willing, at any time to sit with anyone, but certainly with these two, 25 and 30-year-old stories, right, in a facilitated context. Let's create closure. Let's create healing. Let's all own our part in the contribution system. I'll own and say, as I said clearly, 5 years ago, I was 19, the woman was 14, ninth grader in high school. I went to her ninth grade classes. Every time, I hear about it on the web, she keeps getting younger. I become 23 and she becomes 12. I mean, it's not. I went with her to her 9th grade classes at Ramaz High School. It's not true, and I'll never, mention her name. It's inappropriate. But I love this woman with all my soul, right? I remember clearly. I know that she mocks that. I'm completely aware of that. But actually, she wrote me a letter afterwards, fully validating that she had the same experience, right? So can I go back and own my part in that story? Of course I can. Did I not understand certain things then, right? And of course I didn't. But to move from there to that kind of demonization, right, actually will demonize every man and woman in America. Every man and woman in America, right, who has a healthy sexuality, right, has, a complex story someplace somewhere, right, which can be distorted and demonized. It's very easy to distort sexuality.
Okay, enough theory.
Right.
Did you have any idea when the Gary Rosenblatt article came out and was published that this is just the beginning of your nightmare? Like, you probably thought, this is it. Like, my stories come out in the Jewish Week and, it's been done. But that was just the blood in the water for the to start.
That was just it.
Did you realize that this is only the beginning of your nightmare? Did you realize at the time?
I didn't. Although I'll just share with you a moment. I was in Boulder, Colorado, and there was a newspaper article in Haaretz, which is Israel's kind of leading paper and kind of the Sunday or the Friday Haaretz. Which
is like the Sunday New York Times. Israel's New York Times.
That's right. And so they'd run a kind of large positive story on me in 2004.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
Right. And somehow, when that story came out and I saw it, I knew that it would just arouse such primal malice, in that group of people, that somehow it was going to get crazy. Just there's something in my body that knew it. I don't know if you know this idea. There's the kind of knowledge of the body, the knowledge of the heart.
Absolutely.
I knew it in my body.
Yes.
I could feel it, in my body. And just to kind of fast forward, at a particular time, I got divorced from my wife.
Number 3?
And it was my 3rd wife. I think you and I have been married each, an average of 1.5 times, Luke.
Yes.
Right? So we're good on that. Remember, I marry you when you get married.
Yes.
So we got that. So you got the flower, we got the rose.
Yes.
Just if I can,
I'm sniffing a rose.
If I can get people to see here, right?
I'm sitting here sniffing a rose while Marc is crying.
not exactly, but he's got the sniffing of the rose part.
In his soul.
But we all cry in our soul, and it was a devastating story, and weakness, when we kind of get devastated, it's not a weakness, it's our own, deep experience. And to own our devastation, to integrate our devastation is part of being alive. But let me go on here. So what basically happens is, and here, Luke, I think that you did a little bit of we're not going to debate this, I'm just going to give you my thought on it, which you already know, because we talked about it earlier in the car. I think this is where, your blogging did a kind of profound disservice. Because essentially what happened was, the whole kind of negative blog thing just created a kind of crazy environment. It created, so we functioned, we were effective, we thought about you once every month for a second. But ultimately, it creates a kind of vulnerability. Now I know how to deal with that vulnerability effectively. Then I didn't. It was kind of strange. And it's like you're living your life, your reality is your reality, and then virtual reality enters your life. There's this new phenomenon called Google, and all of a sudden when someone Googles your name,
my site is the first
Luke Ford
that comes up to your name.
Luke.
I own you.
Well,
I own you.
You don't anymore, right? Right. But and hopefully you're going to move beyond that as well, my friend. But let's move aside from that, right? Now that's a problem. Tom Tugan, wrote 1,000 articles in his life. I was interested in an article that he wrote. He's not someone I know, but I was interested in an article he wrote. I Googled him, and the first thing that came up was Luke and Tom. What do you do, by the way, to optimize?
Nothing.
How does it happen?
It's simply because it's the best work as reflected by other people who link to it.
So
I do nothing to optimize. All I do is I try to put out a good story, the best I can do.
Other people link to you.
And then other people link to me. And on the power of those links, Google then decides where to place